What if I told you that you've been treating money like a master when it's actually supposed to be your servant? Florence Scovel Shinn revealed this in 1936 when she wrote, and I quote, "Money is God in manifestation, as freedom from want and limitation, but it must be always in circulation and put to right uses. Most people worship money. They serve it. They beg it. They fear losing it." But Shinn taught something radical that contradicts every conventional belief about wealth. She said money is your servant, not your master, and it must obey your commands when you speak with spiritual authority. This isn't metaphor. This is spiritual law. When a woman named Catherine learned this principle in 1934, she was drowning in debt with creditors threatening to take her home. She had been begging money to come, pleading with the universe, hoping and wishing. Then Shinn taught her to stop asking and start commanding. Catherine stood in her living room and declared with authority, "Money, you are my servant. I command you to flow to me now through divine channels." Within 72 hours, she received 3 unexpected payments, totaling more than enough to save her home. Today, I'm revealing why commanding money works when begging fails, and how to activate this spiritual authority in your own life. But first, if you're ready to learn the metaphysical laws that govern prosperity, click that like button right now. That simple action tells the universe and this platform that you're claiming your divine abundance. Now let's dive into why you've been doing this backwards your entire life. Understanding the master-servant relationship with money requires us to examine what Florence Scovel Shinn called the Great Reversal. In her book, Your Word is Your Wand, she explained that humanity has inverted the natural spiritual order. We've made material things our gods and spiritual principles our servants. We serve money, work for money, sacrifice for money, worship money. But in divine order, spirit is master and matter is servant. Money is simply condensed energy that must respond to spiritual command. Shinn wrote, "Man can only get what he sees, and he must see it first in his mind, then it objectifies in his affairs. When you see money as master, you position yourself as slave. When you see money as servant, you position yourself as master." This isn't about ego or manipulation. It's about recognizing your true spiritual identity as a divine being with creative authority over material reality. But here's what most people miss. You can't command something you fear. You can't master something you worship. You can't control something you're desperate for. This is why begging never works. Begging comes from a consciousness of lack. It says, I don't have, I need, I'm powerless. Commanding comes from a consciousness of divine authority. It says, I am supplied, I decree, I have power. Florence Scovel Shinn documented case after case of people who transformed their finances the moment they shifted from asking to commanding. Let me tell you about Robert. In 1937, Robert was a salesman who could barely make his quota. He worked harder than anyone in his office, made more calls, stayed later, but money seemed to avoid him. He attended one of Florence Scovel Shinn's lectures where she taught about commanding money. Robert had always prayed for money to come. Please, God, send me sales. Please let this deal close. Please help me make my numbers. Shinn told him he was positioning himself as a beggar instead of a son of God with divine inheritance. She taught him to command instead of beg. Robert felt uncomfortable at first. It seemed arrogant to command money, but Shinn explained that true spiritual authority isn't arrogance, it's alignment with divine law. She gave him a specific command to speak daily. Money, I am your master. You are my servant. I command you to flow to me now in avalanches of abundance. Robert spoke this declaration every morning before work, not hoping, not wishing, commanding with full expectation of obedience. Within 2 weeks, something shifted. Deals that had been stuck suddenly closed. Clients who had been hesitating suddenly said yes. By the end of the month, Robert had tripled his usual sales. But here's what's important. Robert didn't work harder. He didn't change his technique. He didn't find new clients. He changed his consciousness from servant to master. And money, being energy that responds to consciousness, had no choice but to obey. This brings us to a fundamental principle that Florence Scovel Shinn taught throughout her work. She said, "As is the inner, so always and inevitably will be the outer." Your external financial reality is always a perfect reflection of your internal consciousness about money. If internally you feel powerless, externally you'll be broke. If internally you feel commanded, externally you'll be abundant. But most people are trying to change their outer circumstances while maintaining their inner poverty consciousness. They want more money while still fearing lack. They want abundance while still speaking limitation. They want prosperity while still positioning themselves as victims of economic circumstances. This doesn't work because you can't command from a victim mentality. Victims have no authority. Victims can only beg and hope. But when you recognize yourself as a spiritual being with divine authority, everything changes. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this recognition doesn't come from ego. It comes from understanding spiritual law. In The Game of Life and How to Play It, she wrote, "Every man has power to lift his consciousness and bring good into his life. This power comes from realizing you're not a physical being having a spiritual experience. You're a spiritual being having a physical experience. And as a spiritual being, you have inherent authority over material things, including money." I need to pause here because many of you are recognizing something right now. You've been working hard, doing everything right, but prosperity keeps slipping through your fingers. You're not lazy. You're not unlucky. You've been approaching money from the wrong position. You've been the servant trying to please the master instead of the master directing the servant. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that awareness is the first step to transformation. If you recognize that you've been begging money instead of commanding it, leave a comment saying, "I've been begging, not commanding." When you declare this publicly, even anonymously, you begin dissolving the old pattern, and your courage gives others permission to acknowledge their own misaligned relationship with money. Now let's continue with how to shift from beggar consciousness to master consciousness. The shift from servant to master consciousness happens through what Florence Scovel Shinn called the word. Your word is your wand, she taught. The words you speak either reinforce your slavery to money or establish your mastery over it. Listen to how most people talk about money. I can't afford that. Money is tight. I'm broke. I never have enough. These aren't just descriptions. These are commands. And money, being your servant, must obey your commands. When you say I'm broke, you're commanding money to stay away. When you say I can't afford that, you're commanding lack to manifest. Money doesn't judge your commands as positive or negative. It simply obeys. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn was adamant about changing your speech about finances. In Your Word is Your Wand, she provided specific commands to replace poverty talk. Instead of "I'm broke," say "money flows to me in avalanches of abundance." Instead of "I can't afford it," say "all that is mine by divine right now comes to me." Instead of "money is tight," say "I am rich with the riches of spirit." These aren't just positive affirmations. These are authoritative commands that money must obey when spoken from a consciousness of divine authority. Let me tell you about Margaret, another case from Florence Scovel Shinn's documented work. Margaret was a widow living on a small pension in 1935. She constantly worried about money. She would say things like, "I don't know how I'll make it through winter," or "What if the pension isn't enough?" or "I can't afford new shoes." Every statement was a command for more lack. When Margaret met Florence Scovel Shinn, Shinn immediately identified Margaret's speech pattern as the source of her poverty. Shinn taught her the principle: your word is creating your reality. Every time you speak lack, you command lack to manifest. Margaret protested. "But I'm just being realistic," she said. Shinn responded with one of her most powerful teachings. Realism is simply a belief in limitation. Faith is belief in divine supply. You must choose which master you'll serve. Margaret decided to change her speech. Every time she caught herself speaking lack, she immediately corrected it with a command of abundance. When the thought came, "I can't afford new shoes," she commanded out loud, "All my needs are met. Money is my servant and provides everything I require." When worry about the pension arose, she declared, "I am supplied from the infinite source. Money flows to me in perfect ways." Within 3 months, Margaret's financial situation completely transformed, not because her pension increased, because unexpected money came from sources she never anticipated. An old insurance policy she'd forgotten paid out. A distant relative left her a small inheritance. A neighbor hired her to do light work she enjoyed. Money obeyed her new commands. This leads us to perhaps the most important distinction Florence Scovel Shinn taught about commanding money. There's a difference between commanding and demanding. Demanding comes from desperation. Commanding comes from authority. Demanding is the tantrum of someone who feels powerless. Commanding is the decree of someone who knows their spiritual position. When you demand, you're actually affirming lack because demand only happens when you believe you don't have. When you command, you're affirming supply because command happens when you know you have authority. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote in The Secret Door to Success, "Stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord." This doesn't mean be passive. It means stand in your spiritual authority and command with calm certainty, not with desperate emotion, not with fearful pleading, with quiet, firm, expectant authority. The same way you would command a trained dog to sit. You don't beg. You don't plead. You don't hope. You simply command with the full expectation of obedience. This is how you must speak to money. Now we must address the question many people ask. Isn't it wrong to command money? Isn't that being greedy or materialistic? Florence Scovel Shinn answered this directly. She said, "It is man's duty to be prosperous." She taught that poverty is not spiritual. Poverty is not holy. Poverty is a violation of divine law because divine law states that infinite supply is available to all. When you refuse prosperity, you're actually rejecting your divine inheritance. You're calling God a liar who promised abundance. Commanding money isn't about greed. It's about alignment with spiritual law. It's about accepting your divine inheritance. It's about recognizing that the same power that created galaxies and oceans also created abundance for you. But here's the key. You must command money for right use. Florence Scovel Shinn was clear about this. Money commanded for selfish purposes or to harm others won't flow because that violates spiritual law. But money commanded to meet your needs, to bless others, to fulfill your divine purpose will flow abundantly because that aligns with spiritual law. She wrote, "Every man is a golden link in the chain of my good and in the perfect working out of my life." When you command money to flow so you can be a blessing, the universe must respond. Let me share a third case that demonstrates this principle powerfully. Thomas was a young man in 1939 trying to start a business. He had the skills, the plan, the determination, but no capital. He had asked banks for loans, denied. He had asked investors for funding, rejected. He had asked family for help. They had nothing to give. Thomas heard about Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings and attended her class on commanding prosperity. Shinn taught him to stop asking other people and start commanding the universe. She gave him a specific treatment. Every morning, Thomas would stand before a mirror and declare with authority, "I command the money I need to start my business to come to me now. I am divinely guided to my right investors. Money is my servant and must obey my command for divine supply." Thomas did this for 30 days, not hoping it might work, commanding with expectation. On day 27, a complete stranger approached him in a coffee shop. The man had overheard Thomas talking about his business idea and said, "I don't usually do this, but I have a strong feeling I'm supposed to invest in your business." Within a week, Thomas had the full capital he needed from this unexpected source. The business became successful, and Thomas used it to employ dozens of people during difficult economic times. His commanding of money wasn't selfish. It was aligned with divine purpose, and money, as his servant, had to obey. There's another layer to commanding money that Florence Scovel Shinn taught, which most people miss. You can't command your servant if you don't believe you're the master. This is where consciousness work becomes essential. Many people try to command money while still identifying as poor, as struggling, as victims of circumstances. This creates contradictory energy. You're commanding with your mouth while denying with your consciousness. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that you must change your self-perception before your commands have power. She said, "You must act as if I am, in order to cause to be." This means you must think like a master thinks, speak like a master speaks, and act like a master acts even before the physical evidence appears. When you're living paycheck to paycheck but command money like a master, something shifts in the invisible realm. Your consciousness rises to match your command. And as your consciousness rises, your circumstances must rise to meet it. This is spiritual law. Shinn wrote, "The imaging faculty plays a leading part in the game of life. You must see yourself as master before you can command as master." Florence Scovel Shinn taught a specific practice for establishing master consciousness. She called it the mirror treatment. Every morning, look in the mirror and declare who you are in spiritual reality, not physical appearance. Say, "I am a divine being with spiritual authority. I am master over material things. Money is my servant and must obey me. I command abundance to flow to me now." As you say these words, feel the authority behind them, not arrogant authority, divine authority. The same authority Jesus demonstrated when he commanded the fig tree to wither or the storm to be still. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He commanded from his position as one with divine source. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this same authority lives in every person because every person is made in the image and likeness of God. But most people never activate it. They live their entire lives as beggars when they were born to be masters. The mirror treatment rewires your subconscious mind to recognize your true identity. And when your subconscious accepts your identity as master, your commands become irresistible to money. Here's what happens in the invisible realm when you command money from master consciousness. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that there are invisible supply lines constantly surrounding you. Infinite abundance already exists in the spiritual realm. Your commands open the channels for that abundance to flow into physical manifestation. But when you beg, you close the channels. Begging creates an energy of lack that actually repels abundance. Commanding creates an energy of authority that attracts abundance. Think of it like a king issuing a decree versus a beggar asking for coins. The king's decree is executed because he has authority. The beggar's request may be ignored because he has no power. You're not a beggar. You're royalty in the kingdom of God. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote, "You are the king in your own kingdom." When you realize your kingship, your decrees must be obeyed. Money is just one of many servants in your kingdom. When the king commands, the servant doesn't debate or delay. The servant obeys immediately. Now we must discuss timing because many people command money and then become impatient when it doesn't manifest instantly. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that there is divine timing at work. She said, "Infinite intelligence knows the way. Your command sets things in motion in the invisible realm. Circumstances must align. People must be moved into position. Opportunities must be created. This happens behind the scenes faster than you can orchestrate with human effort. But you must maintain your master consciousness while the invisible work happens. This means you keep commanding, not from desperation, but from certainty. You keep declaring your abundance, not as a wish, but as a fact. You keep speaking to money as your servant, even before you see physical evidence. This is what Shinn called living by faith, not by sight. Your faith isn't hoping something might happen. Your faith is knowing it must happen because you've commanded it from your position of spiritual authority, and spiritual law cannot be violated. Let me tell you what happens when you doubt your command. Doubt cancels authority. When you command money to come but then think, but what if it doesn't work? You've just issued a contradictory command. Money is your servant, but servants become confused when the master issues opposing orders. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that you must guard your consciousness after giving a command. She said, after speaking the word, never look back. Don't revisit the problem. Don't entertain doubt. Don't allow fear to creep in. You've commanded. Now trust. This is what she meant by stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. You've done your part by commanding. Now let divine intelligence do its part by manifesting. Your job is to maintain the consciousness of a master who expects obedience, not a servant who hopes for mercy. When doubts come, and they will, simply repeat your command. Money, you are my servant. I command you to flow to me now. Remind yourself and remind money of the established order. Florence Scovel Shinn also taught about the principle of circulation regarding money as servant. She said, money must always be in circulation. When you hoard money out of fear, you treat it as master. When you spend and give money from a place of abundance consciousness, you demonstrate mastery. This seems contradictory to conventional financial wisdom that says, save everything and spend nothing. But spiritual law says that circulation activates flow. When you command money to come and then give generously when it does, you're demonstrating to the universe that you trust your ability to command more. You're proving you're the master, not the servant. Shinn wrote, every man gives to the man who has. When you act like someone who has abundant supply, more supply comes. When you act like someone who's afraid of running out, you create the experience of running out. This doesn't mean be foolish with money. It means operate from abundance consciousness rather than lack consciousness. Give when prompted, spend on what's needed, and trust that as master, you can always command your servant money to return in greater measure. There's a specific technique Florence Scovel Shinn taught for commanding money in emergency situations. She called it the definite command. When you need money for a specific purpose by a specific time, you give money a direct order. You don't say, I hope money comes, or it would be nice if money arrived. You say, I command the exact sum of money needed for this purpose to come to me by this date. Be specific. Money needs clear instructions, just like any servant needs clear instructions. Vague commands produce vague results. Specific commands produce specific results. Shinn documented numerous cases where people commanded specific amounts by specific dates, and the money appeared exactly as commanded. One woman needed $500 for medical bills by Friday. She commanded that exact amount by that exact date. On Thursday afternoon, a check arrived in the mail from a class action lawsuit she'd forgotten she'd joined. The amount? $512. The servant money obeyed the master's specific command. Let's address what Florence Scovel Shinn called the divine selection process. When you command money to come, don't dictate the source. Your job is to command the manifestation. Divine intelligence's job is to determine the channel. If you say, I command this money to come from my job, you limit the universe to one channel. But Shinn taught to say, I command this money to come through divine channels. This opens infinite possibilities. Money might come through your job, or a gift, or an opportunity, or a refund, or an inheritance, or something you never imagined. The servant has many ways to reach you. Don't limit the servant's path. Just command the arrival. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote, God has a supply for every demand, and sooner or later it must manifest. Your demand is your command. God's supply is money's obedience. Trust the process. The master commands. The servant obeys. Divine intelligence coordinates the meeting. Now we come to the most powerful aspect of commanding money that Florence Scovel Shinn taught. She called it the command of thanksgiving. After you've issued your command for money to come, immediately begin thanking it for coming, not as a hope, as a certainty. Say, I thank you, money, for flowing to me now. I thank you, divine intelligence, for sending my servant to me. I thank you for the avalanche of abundance already on its way. This thanksgiving isn't pretending. It's declaring. It's standing in the reality you've commanded before it manifests physically. Shinn taught that thanksgiving seals your command. It says the matter is settled. The servant is en route. The master is satisfied. When you thank before receiving, you demonstrate absolute faith in your authority. And that faith activates the manifestation faster than anything else. She wrote, gratitude is the bridge between conscious and subconscious, and you must praise before you receive. Start thanking your servant money right now for its obedience. Watch how quickly it appears when you do. I want to tell you about the compound effect of commanding money consistently. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that every command builds spiritual momentum. The first time you command money, you might feel doubt. The second time, a little more confidence. The 10th time, expectancy. The 100th time, absolute certainty. And when you reach absolute certainty, money responds instantly because your consciousness has fully embodied the master identity. This is why Shinn taught daily declarations. Not because the universe is hard of hearing, because your consciousness needs repetition to establish new patterns. Every day you command money as master. You're dissolving old beggar consciousness and establishing new king consciousness. Over time, commanding becomes natural. You stop thinking poor thoughts. You stop speaking lack words. You stop fearing financial situations. You simply command solutions and expect obedience. This is what Shinn called mastery over the material realm, and it's available to anyone willing to claim their spiritual authority. Let me give you the exact framework Florence Scovel Shinn used for commanding money. First, recognize your identity. Say, I am a divine being with creative authority. Second, establish the relationship. Say, money is my servant, not my master. Third, issue the specific command. Say, I command the money I need for this purpose to come to me now through divine channels. Fourth, express certainty. Say, I know this command is being obeyed in the invisible realm right now. Fifth, give thanks. Say, I thank you, money, for your obedience. I thank you, divine intelligence, for orchestrating this manifestation. Sixth, maintain master consciousness. Refuse all thoughts of doubt, fear, or lack. Seventh, expect evidence. Watch for the physical manifestation with anticipation, not anxiety. This is the complete process. Do this daily for any financial need. Do this specifically when facing a financial challenge. Do this consistently until commanding money becomes as natural as breathing. Florence Scovel Shinn promised that anyone who applies this principle with faith will see results. Not because it's magic, because it's spiritual law. If you've made it this far, it's because your soul recognizes truth when it hears it. And I want you to know this isn't accidental. Divine prosperity exists for people who are ready to align their consciousness with the spiritual laws that govern abundance. People who understand that prosperity isn't just about working harder, it's about thinking differently. This isn't just another finance channel teaching budgets and investments you can find anywhere. This is where we explore the metaphysical principles Florence Scovel Shinn taught that transform financial reality from the inside out. If you're ready to activate divine supply in your life, subscribe to Divine Prosperity and turn on notifications. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we release new teachings on spiritual laws of abundance, the power of the spoken word, and how to dissolve prosperity blocks. Not theory, practical application, because what you believe creates what you receive, and what you speak manifests in your life. Next video, we're decoding the sleep manifestation technique Florence Scovel Shinn taught for reprogramming your subconscious mind while you rest, the method that produced overnight financial transformations. Your prosperity is divinely ordained. The choice to claim it is yours.